Welcome to our 100th episode of Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. 100 episodes. Isn't that cool?
Yes.
That's fun. And we have a really fun and interesting and informative interview today that we've just done. Judy, tell folks the title of this episode.
Okay. Does divorce have to be horrible? An interview with collaborative divorce attorney Nicole Quallen.
And, spoiler alert, the answer is no, divorce doesn't have to be
That's
horrible.
right.
That's the whole point. So I hope you'll enjoy that. Before we do that, let's put in a word for the podcast itself. Please let everybody know about this podcast. I want to put in a word for a new development, which is my newsletter. If you go to our website, which you see above our heads if you're watching the video, CTIN7, that's the number 7, CTIN7.com, you will see there is an opportunity there to sign up for Dr. Chalmers' newsletter. A box will magically appear. I like to tell folks, it's worth going there just to watch the box magically appear. I'm way over impressed with this simple function of the Elementor. Yes, it's Elementor for those of you who are in the know. Anyway, please go there and do sign up for my newsletter. I'm having a lot of fun writing it, and it's we want it to be interactive, and so please do that. Also, we better put in a word for our merch. We have our lovely Couples Therapy in 7 Word mugs in the 11 and 15 ounce sizes with the logo on one side and the inspiring message on the other. Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And you can get tote bags, you can get t-shirts, you can get all that stuff. And finally, the one additional thing we need to put in a word for before we go to our interview is
the book. It's not about communication. Why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong.
Exactly.
That's the new book, I should say.
That's the new book. As the day we are recording this, which is the 13th, Friday the 13th, 2023. The book is fully released. Actually, you can already get it in paperback. You can already get it as an audiobook. And the day after tomorrow, on the 15th, it will be available for Kindle. And dare I say this? I will say this. Hey, folks, don't tell anybody. Actually, tell anybody you want. I'm going to do a promotion, a 99-cent promotion. Right now, you have to pay $2.99 for it. You can do that. You can spring for $2.99 for the Kindle version. But if you want to wait a little bit for the 99-cent version, watch this space, and I'll be announcing when that happens. I haven't figured out exactly when. It takes a little while for that to happen. So that's our intro stuff, I believe.
Yes. So let's get on with our interview with Nicole.
So you will hear Judy introducing our guest, and then you'll see our interview. And we hope you enjoy it. We'll be back afterward.
Our guest today is Nicole Quallen. Nicole is a trained attorney and mediator practicing collaborative family law at Two Families Law in Durham, North Carolina. She earned her JD from Carolina Law in 2010 and still thinks her professors there are the best of the best. Nicole is a mother, an ex-spouse, a co-parent, an empath, a big-hearted entrepreneur, and an advocate. She began Two Families Law in 2016 as a way to provide a different kind of divorce for families. Nicole went through a rough divorce herself and knows that her clients are brave, strong, and resilient. She believes that the legal divorce process can be a time to respectfully sort through priorities and create two healthy family units. Nicole and Two Families Law work exclusively outside of court through collaborative and cooperative divorce processes, bringing resolution and avoiding trauma for hundreds of North Carolina families. Nicole loves to work with nonviolent communication and creative brainstorming to help families resolve their legal needs, and she loves to spread the word about collaborative law to anyone who wants to listen. Nicole, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here.
We're delighted to have you. So how did you get into, I could finish that sentence with a bunch of things. How'd you get into law? How'd you get into collaborative family? How'd you get into family law? How'd you get into collaborative family law? Tell us about your own journey, whatever you'd like to tell us about.
Yeah, okay. Well, there are separate answers to both of them. I think I've heard other people say this about their callings, but I think my situation is one where I didn't find family law. It kept finding me, and I finally succumbed to it. I didn't even take family law in law school. I came to law school. I think I'm not alone in this either, but I came to law school not having any idea of exactly what I wanted to do. I studied sociology in undergrad, which was beautiful and suits me and still affects my practice. Didn't know quite what to do, and went to law school and really loved it. I thrived intellectually and interpersonally in law school. But never took family law, didn't have any real calling to it. I studied mostly constitutional law and all of these very theoretical, big-minded type things. And then I graduated in 2010, which was on the heels of the 2008 and 2009 recession when law firms were changing. I was actually set to take a job at our state's attorney's general's office, which disappeared after an election where the North Carolina government changed political views and appointees. And this family law job came to me. A friend from law school had it. I just needed any job at all. And I said, okay, family law, I'm a people person. And being a sociology major, I was, probably very similar to a lot of people in your therapy world. I was fascinated by interpersonal dynamics and what happens in the home and family units. And not knowing much more than that, I took this job in family law. And that job was with one of these, what I'd call like a traditional litigation-based family law firm. So, we were going to court almost every day. We were fighting for the rights of our clients. We were in custodial battles. We were fighting for money. And fight is really the word. And I made it, not even 2 years in that firm. And I had a great boss who taught me so much. But the court system it just felt awful and upstream. And so I left. I left that firm. I left the state. I moved to New York City and said, that's it. I'm not practicing law. I'm going to do something else. I worked, and then, the story evolved and I wound up spending 4 years working for different nonprofits. And it honestly felt like penance. I felt like the court system and the legal system, I was just so disappointed with what I saw. And I found my way to collaborative law. And I'll say this is one part of the story that I think it resonates for a lot of people and connects them, is we would have this phenomenon in litigation. And I was, a young associate, so I was doing, the grunt work. And a new client would come in the office, just one of the spouses, and I'd meet with them and they'd say to me, the marriage just didn't work out. There was no infidelity, nothing, salacious happening, but the marriage is over and, we think we've got things pretty well worked out. And we would just like a lawyer to put it in writing and, advise us on what we're missing. And I would say, great, this sounds very humane. I'd love to be part of helping you memorialize that. And I was 26 at this point and not super worldly and had much to learn about the world, but I thought that's great. And then, this more senior lawyers would work with this person and they'd step in and there would be all of these conversations about like, well, you could ask for more money and, oh, you're just going to let go of the house like that. You could do this. And like, well, are you sure you want this custody arrangement? Where these attorneys, who I think were well-meaning, felt like they needed to empower their client to get everything they could.
Yeah.
Fast forward 2 months, this person would be back in my office, or my senior partner would come to me and say, okay, we need to file a lawsuit for custody, we need to file a lawsuit for distribution, and we need to allege this and that. And I'd say, I thought they were fine. I thought they had worked it all out. And they'd say, well, she didn't know what she was talking about. We've advised her, and now we're going to try to seek more.
Wow.
And I'm remembering from, we're a second marriage. If you've watched some of our, we've been through it. And actually mine was both of ours in various ways were quite collaborative, actually.
Beautiful.
But not formally so, but I'm remembering from when my now ex and I were working with a single lawyer. And one of the things that was clear, and he was clear about it, one of the things that was clear was he needed to protect himself from our coming back later and saying, well, wait a minute, you didn't tell me, X, Y, or Z that I could have, that now I'm regretting. So there's a pressure, is this right? There's a pressure on the lawyers to say, yeah, you're saying you're okay, but I don't want to hear from you in 2 years. I don't want you suing me or yelling at me, telling me that I should have, come up with this. I should have come up with a better deal for you and you didn't realize it. Is that
Absolutely. That's right. And that is absolutely a strong culture in the legal world. And there are very real malpractice-based pressures that say that to clients. And that does happen. People do come back and say, I didn't know this. But I'm sometimes I'm critical of that culture, because it seems like this zero-sum game. Either you can give your clients robust representation and let them know what their rights are, or you can let them collaborate. And I and the vast majority of the collaborative attorneys, who are thousands of us around the world practicing, we think it's more of a both. And something that I'm saying to clients every day is, listen, if you wanted to go to a courthouse and play the lottery that is a trial, you could ask for, $300 more a month in spousal support, or you could ask for a different custodial arrangement. And I think it's also responsible of me to say to them, but you have to know that that comes at a great cost of legal fees with some estimates, and it comes with a great emotional toll and a psychological toll of what a trial looks like. And there is this risk that, the law, for better and for worse, is not this, it's not a calculator. It's not like you stick in these numbers and you get this result. And I always say our courtrooms are on the 6th floor of the courthouse. And I say, if you go to 6A on Monday, you might get this result. And if you go to 6B on Tuesday, you might get another result. And the gap is huge. So I think that's a more nuanced and holistic way of meeting that exact thing. But Bruce, what you described, and hopefully your lawyer did a good job. And it's interesting, you both met with one lawyer. That's what a lot of my families want to do. In North Carolina, one lawyer is not allowed to represent both spouses.
What ours required right up front, he said, I will do this with you. He was actually reluctant.
Yeah.
He'd sort of been burned before. He
Yeah.
said, he evaluated that, okay, we don't seem to be fighting a lot. I will do this with you, but only if before we sign the final agreement that you each have your own lawyer look it over.
Oh, okay.
This is
Oh, interesting.
So we did all the negotiations with the one lawyer. Then we each had our respective attorney look it over, which didn't generate any additional difficulties, probably because we were both oriented to not creating additional difficulties, because I think we both could have if we wanted to.
Yeah.
But we didn't want to.
And I actually did get my divorce in North Carolina. I had
You did? Where?
at the time.
In Greensboro? Wow. Are you from here?
No, I'm from
Okay.
New York.
Okay.
It is a long story, but anyway, I don't think my ex even had a lawyer, come to think
Yeah.
of it.
That's how a lot. So we offer a couple different formats, but one that we do, we call it a cooperative divorce, where we represent one spouse and we sign paperwork and we engage them, and the other spouse represents themselves. And the negotiations can take place together, but we're not allowed to give them counsel. We're not allowed to say this is a bad deal, this is a good deal. And then they may at the end also take it to their own respective attorney, have it looked over. Yeah, that's, and these things vary by lawyer and state, but yeah. Anyway, it's absolutely the culture of what attorneys are trying to do. And I think these attorneys are absolutely trying to do their best, trying to meet their ethical obligation. However, it just makes a different kind of conflict. I'm sure if you look at the therapy world, what you could see is if two spouses are in separate modes of therapy, maybe with therapists who are extra protective or defensive, and they're only hearing one story and one perspective, and then they come into couples therapy and they've got this idea, one spouse has heard, well, it's all about your spouse's attachment problem, and the other one says, well, it's all about the other spouse's trauma patterns. And then they come in together and it's like they've got these Greek choruses in their ear. And
I've experienced that. And it is fascinating. There is a guy named Bill Doherty, I don't know if you've heard of Braver Angels. Do you know that organization?
Yeah.
He was kind of the sort of philosophical founder of that. He's a couples therapist, and he's written about the danger of individual therapy to couples.
Interesting.
Not to knock individual therapy, but it can have that particular effect. There's a couple things let me come back to something else, and feel free to address this or not as you wish.
Yeah.
You did mention in the intro that we read, which you of course kindly provided us, that you've been through a rough divorce yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering to what extent that has informed you, to whatever extent you want to talk about it, how that informed your getting into collaborative law.
Yes. Well, I have just the most ironic story, and I'm not the only one with this, but my story is that I was, when I met my spouse, it was during that period I was working for a nonprofit. And so I was, sort of a latent lawyer. My ex-spouse, the father of my children, is also a lawyer. And we met, and I started this collaborative practice after my first child was born.
So while you were still married, in other words, it wasn't because, you went through hell in a divorce and you're going to do better for people.
That's right. Which is what everyone thinks. That's what everyone thinks, but it's much more cosmic and ironic. And then we wound up, deciding to separate 4 or 5 years into my practice, something like that. And I thought, well, I've just made my career and my brand about collaborative law. I am so invested in nonviolent communication, and my ex-spouse, who is, sort of a litigation-based attorney and has that type of personality. And, I asked and we tried, but we ultimately could not do a collaborative practice. And so we wound up having the toughest litigators in town. And we've been separated for 4 years now, and we still have court involvement. So in those first couple of years, it really blew open my mind and my understanding of divorce. It has brought me more empathy than you could buy or train your way into.
Nothing like miserable crises to really teach you something, That's, what do they call it? AFCO, another frigging growth experience.
Yes, that's so funny. One of my mentors says that same thing. Another, he says the full word, another growth experience. That's right. And
we're mostly PG on this. It's not in a session I would be using the other word, but mostly.
That's right. So that's what it was for me. And I could go really deep into that question about what it has taught me. But it's stunning. And something that actually surprises me is, so I practice collaborative law here in Durham, and in collaborative law, you need each spouse has their own collaborative attorney. So you wind up having to have a network of other collaborative attorneys to practice with. And then we have cases over and over. So I have this beautiful network of brilliant, kind, gentle, wise people who practice this. And almost none of them are divorced themselves.
Yeah.
which, some people say, why on earth would you practice that if you hadn't been through it? And I
Yeah.
sometimes think that too. But so it just, you just understand it in a different way.
Well, what you're illustrating, and actually it's interesting from a therapist's point of view. What you're illustrating, of course, is that that principle or the idea of collaborative law doesn't work for every couple for a very good reason. And that, which is, you kind of have to acknowledge it. And it's interesting from a therapy perspective. I have noted with couples on occasion that, because, I hear these stories coming from the other side. I've done lots of individual therapy with folks over the years too.
Yeah.
And even in the context of couples, I work with some couples who are in the process of divorcing because they're trying to find ways of doing it in ways that, that aren't horrible for their kids, recognizing there's a big difference between mediation and I wrote about this in my last book, actually. I wrote a section talking about how if you need a mediator, go to a mediator. Couples therapists like me tend to be lousy mediators. It's not the same process.
Yeah.
But my point is, I have noted with folks sometimes that one of the advantages of the existence of the court system with all of its nastiness in terms of adversarial processes, you will get an answer. There are people who have coercive power who can force an answer on you if you can't come up with one yourself. That can actually be kind of comforting. It's like, well, do the best you can in coming up with something that is good for both of you and your kids and everybody else. If you can't, someone will decide for you.
Yeah.
At least you'll get finality. It may suck, but you'll get an answer. And I think that's an important part of the process because otherwise it can go on forever.
Yeah.
I completely agree with what you've just said. That is and my law partner, I practice law alongside another amazing collaborative attorney. And we both, and she came from a domestic violence attorney background, and we both agree completely. Collaborative is not for everyone. The court system is miserable, but it is a very real backstop, and it has that finality. And I love that phrase, coercive power. But what I will say is so interesting is that a lot, maybe the majority of collaborative attorneys and sort of advocates for the collaborative process, they bristle against that idea. There's this notion that every divorce or dispute could be solved through a collaborative, nonviolent process if the container is big enough, meaning if you have enough support and therapists and coaches and neutral child psychologists. And what I always say to that is, well, maybe that's true, but I just know that not everyone can afford that container.
Right.
So
yeah, and I would respectfully demur, that I coming from the therapy side, I would say that's nonsense. It's just nonsense. No, there are, and your colleague who comes from a domestic violence, law background, you can't do collaborative, you can't do mediation with somebody if they're in fear of saying what they want. I'm telling you what you know better than I do.
Well, that's my experience. I'm going to tell people that there's backing from a therapist, but that's exactly, the domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and the power dynamic, that is the case in point that my law partner, Sarah is her name, that Sarah and I say every day. And I think, and my marriage was, it was very psychologically abusive with an imbalance of power. And the person I was divorcing has a lot of, probably bordering on the personality disorder side that would just make, what we do in collaborative divorce, it's about, listening, making requests, empathic listening. And, it's not perfect. And, the vast majority of our cases, they're in conflict for a lot of the time, but there's only so much you can do when someone has like a personality disorder or has had a history of abuse for 20 years. It winds up hurting the person who had the lesser power in the relationship. They're just going to continue to have lesser power in that dynamic. And I think a good collaborative attorney can recognize that and try to, we represent a lot of women who tend to have more or have less societal power and less, relational power and less economic power. And we can try to even the stakes, but there are cases where just you can't. So that has been my experience over and over. And we do sometimes take cases, and when I'm meeting with someone and they say, I don't know if this can be collaborative, you get lots where one spouse is like, I want it to be collaborative. I want to do this for the kids. I want to stay out of court. I don't know if my spouse can, and we'll sort of give them the pros and the cons. And sometimes we'll take cases on where I'm like, oh, I just don't know. And it's a balance of pros and cons, because the court system can also be abusive. And
Yes,
that's what Sarah would say from a domestic violence background, is she said, well, I marched these brave survivors up to the stand to tell their truth about how they've been abused. And some judges say, it's he said, she said, order denied. And now they've just been, that ultimate coercive authority has just validated their abuser.
Yeah.
So there's that too.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned, and also that I saw in your bio, you talked about nonviolent communication. Now, I wasn't familiar. I didn't know that was a thing till Bruce explained it to me. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I'm not a therapist. I'm an educator, and I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
So you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I have to believe there are other folks like me out there that are not familiar with this.
Totally. Yes. It's a very interesting thing. And has its roots a bit in education, actually, Judy. So, and I'm not an expert, but nonviolent communication, or NVC, often goes hand in hand with collaborative law. So we do a lot of trainings with that within our organization. And Bruce, correct me or jump in here where you have other parts of it, because it's such a big philosophy.
Yeah, and I will say I'm not an expert in it. I'm familiar with it, but I'm not.
Okay. So we're both dabblers a bit.
Yes.
So
as opposed to violent communication, but I also
it is right.
So
So NVC, I'll get just a quick background on it, was developed by a man named Marshall Rosenberg. He's passed away. He's a good Jew, like the three of us, and he was grew up in Holocaust survivor communities, and that informed how he worked. And he put together this philosophical, practical system written in his famous book called Nonviolent Communication. And it was built largely around school desegregation. So this is where the educational ties are in. And so you can imagine the conflict that came up in integrating or desegregating, at least, schools. And it's a wide-reaching theory. If I tried to put it succinctly, one of the goals of the school of thought is that every human being has a set of inherent and also shifting needs and wants, but needs that can always be met. The need for security. These are largely emotional needs, and sometimes psychological. Physical are related, but a need for safety, a need for closeness, a need to be heard, a need for mutuality, and that in conflict or in communication or in relationship, you can identify these needs within yourself, share them with someone else. Sometimes we're going to meet our own needs. A lot of times we're going to meet our own emotional needs. Sometimes we need someone else or a community to meet those needs for us. And the ways we go about them, there's like a request and response format, which I love, and we do all the time in negotiation. And then, as you say, Judy, this was the first thing that stuck with me when I started learning this stuff. It is the opposite of violent communication. And this is something I think our world really needs now and always, is that he says something beautiful in the opening of the book that's like, words are incredibly powerful. And we all know that hitting someone is violent, but our words can be violent all the time. And not just, saying something horrific, you're an awful jerk, but threats are violent, If you don't,
threats are violent often, and it's a lot of that is below the level of consciousness. that there's, which is where power differences often come in.
Right, threatening to take the children away, or threatening to cut you off financially, or threatening to expose secrets that you learned in a marriage that you wouldn't want out there. You're talking about that sort of thing, I guess.
Absolutely. And you can imagine, I mean, I think, I haven't said this before, but it's just occurring to me. I think I'd say in litigation, violent communication is the go-to. That's all you're doing. You're making threats, you're making trades. They are that coercive power. And what nonviolent communication says is stop trying to control or hurt the other party as a means of getting what you want, and start being in touch with what you need and ask for it.
Yeah.
And maybe the person can say yes, and maybe they cannot, but then you're not stealing it from someone.
See, it's founded on a worldview that posits, when they make statements like, well, everybody's needs can be met that way if one but is willing to open your mind to that. It's that last part that's the tricky part, because there are people whose worldview would quite specifically reject that. You familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work, Haidt?
It rings a faint bell, but not intimately.
I'm a fan. I've never met him, but I'm a fan. I don't know if we could get him. He's a big name nowadays.
Okay, tell me about him.
Yeah, he wrote a book, I think his most famous book, he's written a number of books. His most famous one is called The Righteous Mind. Came out about 10 or 11 years ago, somewhere in there. And he talks about different moral foundations. He's one of the founders of moral foundations theory. And the idea that would say that, gee, shouldn't it be true for everyone that I want to get my needs met and you want to get your needs met, and of course we want to find a solution that handles both of those things, and the main thing is that it be not harmful, in fact that it be helpful, and that it be fair in some level. And that ignores a bunch of other pillars that are really important to other folks.
Yeah.
And the issue with people who are saying, oh, well, our system works for everybody, it ignores the fact that actually it doesn't. There's another concept you may have heard of. I'm forgetting the guy's name. The notion of weird cultures, WEIRD, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Oh,
yeah.
And that it works in weird cultures, but not necessarily even within our culture. There's all sorts of folks for whom they would say, wait a minute, you're ignoring the importance of authority. You're ignoring the idea that says, well, wives are supposed to defer to husbands. That's sacred. And all sorts of, I'm not saying that. I'm citing that.
Yes.
I don't believe that. But there are folks who do, men and women actually, who do in good faith. And it's fascinating that they won't hear that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The premises are different. I'll tell you one other thought that occurs to me with respect to systems. Because again, I'm a fan of collaborative law, and I'm even a fan of nonviolent communication up to a point. My last book was called "It's Not About Communication." That'll tell you something.
I know, I'm so fascinated, because I often think when everyone says communication is the thing in marriage, I'm like, I don't know that I don't think it
is. Well, hey folks, anybody watching this, get my book. You should read all the time. But I have a story actually I tell in there of. This is actually in the section where I talk about the danger of therapists trying to be mediators. I remember a psychologist who would come up with this wonderful collaborative system to work with very conflictual families who were divorcing. And so I went to, must be 25 years ago, I went to a training, a continuing education training, where she was presenting the system, which really sounded good. And there were therapists there and there were lawyers there. I happened to be sitting next to a Supreme Court, Vermont Supreme Court justice, actually.
Wow, cool.
And so she gave this thing and she handed out an example. Of course, the names had been changed. I looked at it and I, of course, didn't say anything, but I went, oh, I know these people. I've seen this document with the actual names. And I knew what the presenter did not know, which was this was an agreement that literally before the ink was dry, it's like when they were walking out of the room, the man was already violating the agreement. He was already threatening her with court. It didn't work at all, even though the system, the theory said this should have worked. This should have been a great example. So I don't know. I just take that as sort of a cautionary tale. Everybody's great systems, including my own, of course, don't always work.
Yep. Yeah. That's a great example. I just had a client say something so wise to me, this really young person who was actually unmarried, but they and their partner bought a home together and then broke up, and so they needed to mediate, and they were mediating, but I was sort of advising one of the partners, and they said to me, I asked, like, how's mediation going? How's your mediator? And they were like, it's okay. We're like getting somewhere. And they said, I feel like the mediator doesn't necessarily want us to have a good agreement. They just want us to have an agreement.
Yeah.
And I said, yep, I know that. And I get stuck in that mindset too, of when you're learning conflict resolution, it's often just aimed at a resolution. And that resolution may not be tenable, as you say, or may be violated. And I think if you're forward thinking, you want your agreement not just to be an agreement, but you want it to be durable. You want it to be just.
Right.
If you can get some justice, justice is, we're all looking for it, but the more of those integrity type values you can get in that agreement, the better it is. And, in court is the same way. Court orders are riddled with, unfairness and unenforceable things. And that's a big underlying reason why family law is so sticky and why these disputes are right up there with, international Israeli-Palestinian conflict level. Truly, like one of my trainers, he does celebrity divorces in Hollywood to make his money. And then for his humanitarian work, he goes on the ground at war-torn nations and helps them resolve, because it is the same. It is our very most vulnerable human needs, our family, our children, our home. That's what's on the line in divorce. And that's what's on the line, when your nation is at war. And courts are not set up to, it's just
Right.
big. It's the extraordinary judge that can try to, cut the baby in half in a good way. So we're all sort of getting at these impossible, well, I don't think it is impossible, but very difficult questions to ask.
Yeah. This might be a good time to go to our listener letter. We have a listener letter, which I think will be right up your alley.
Okay.
Short one. Camilla writes, Dear Bruce and Judy, I know some people use couples therapy as a way of saving a marriage, but my husband, I'll call him Dave, and I have been through that, and it didn't help. Or maybe I should say it did help in one way. It convinced me that we needed to divorce. Dave didn't want to at first, but now he realizes I'm not going to change my mind, and he seems to be accepting the inevitable. So that's where we are now. I'm ready to file for divorce. You've talked about working with couples who realize they need to split up and working with them to help them do it as well as they can. Dave and I have had some hard times, but we don't want to be horrible to each other. I know he's a decent guy and a good father to our 2 kids. What are some pointers you can offer to help us do this well? So we've got the expert here.
There you are.
And
I will note it's interesting because she's writing this to a therapist, right? 2 of us who talk about therapy. And of course, what we're inviting from you is a legal perspective.
Yeah.
I'm imagining they overlap quite a bit, but they may be different. So I'm curious.
That's right. Well, there is so much overlap. Therapists are our greatest allies as collaborative attorneys. We work with therapists all the time. Usually our clients are honestly usually already in therapy when we find them, individual and or couples. And if they're not, we send them that way. I'm often keeping touch with the therapists to say, this is where our guy is struggling. Can you talk him through this thing that's happening? But I am not a trained therapist. I have no formal therapy training. Okay, so, oh man, there's so much there. So I love the bit about couples therapy did help her to know that she was ready to divorce.
Yeah.
That is a huge place to get to. Some of my favorite therapists, couples therapists, tell me that. They say, similarly to like being oriented only to resolution, even if it's not the best. I think about this all the time, and I am always willing to be corrected and my views shift, but it doesn't seem to me from what I've seen that every marriage should last forever.
Yeah.
And that there are marriages that the greatest gift to all of the people involved is to end the marriage.
Mhm.
And I just will validate that to everyone going through it. The end of my marriage is the best, most life-giving thing that has ever happened to me. The trajectory of my life and my children's lives is just through the roof compared to where it was and where it was going. And I think that's just such an important thing for this person to try to own, if that is her truth.
Yeah.
And then, so the question of what are things we can do not to blow this up, not to hurt each other, to be good to our kids. I mean, that's the $1 million question. And I have all sorts of answers. I'll try to give some of them. And I think the first thing, or one of the grounding and central things that she could do, is to keep remembering that goal as you start negotiating, the brass tacks of divorce. What are we going to do with the house? What does our retirement savings look like? How are we each going to run two separate households on two separate budgets with the same income as we had before, or similar? Some people change. Those are very difficult questions on their own. Not to mention the fact that you're asking these questions with someone who you've been, intimate and connected with for many times, many years. As you're negotiating those things, it is unbelievably tempting, or just like, I think we're wired to stay in that conflict.
Yeah.
So it might be useful, after you've had a mediation session or before you had a mediation session, to remember this goal of like, okay, no matter how, this house thing shakes out or this retirement thing, I need to remember that that maybe an even more important goal is to have peace of mind.
Yeah.
And to maintain what you can. And this is especially, it's very different with children and not. If you don't have children, you're less likely to be connected to that person throughout their lives. So you don't have to, you could say things and do things that you wouldn't do to the other parent of your children, but you're going to have a co-parenting relationship, even if your children are grown. And you may have to make decisions to respect that co-parenting relationship that are not what your lawyer would say, or that are not, maybe not rational. Like I gave up a whole bunch of financial things that could have helped me, or, would have been good for my financial stability. But my mental health and the well-being of my children said, well, I think it's a better decision to say no to money and yes to having this done and having an agreement.
I've seen that work actually in both ways, because I absolutely agree with you. That's like, yeah, I see lots of folks who are inclined to just keep fighting, and they realize, wait a minute, there is value in resolution, even if it wasn't as what I wanted it to be. I've also seen the other one where people have agreed to stuff just to get it over with, that they have later regretted greatly. And I'm sure that's a lot of the skills of what you offer are to help people avoid that.
I agree. And I love just the sentence, there is value in resolution. So there is value in alimony. There is value in child support. There is value in a retirement account, very tangible value. There is value in resolution.
Yeah.
There is value in co-parenting. There is value in, in these relationships where there is emotional violence and, power-based abuse. It's even harder to try to compromise with that person. Maybe someone has belittled you and taught you to always give in. Sometimes those are the toughest cases, is when someone has said enough is enough. I'm done accepting this crappy treatment. And then they file for the divorce, and then they're like, well, now I'm going to I'm going to use this as my opportunity to try to even the scales by asking for everything, which I get. I get that. But I think what I've found is that it actually doesn't feel that good. And
Yeah.
and only the lawyers win that game with the
Mhm.
legal fees. Because often what I say to people is like, I would love for you to have an apology. I would love for you to have justice. I would love for this person to become a better parent. I don't see that happening anytime soon. And if
Well,
it,
if it were going to, you'd probably still be staying married, actually.
yes,
That is often the case, not always.
right. Um, or it might happen in 20 years and you might not have the stamina or the desire to wait. And so what I say is those are probably not things you can get in this room, this room being the collaborative negotiation table. One beautiful exercise that we often do at the beginning of a collaborative divorce in the very first session is we ask both of the spouses sort of separately to craft a mission statement. And we put it right up on our monitor and we say, this can be anything from your kids and how they grow up to, how you want to conduct yourself in this process to where you'd like to be. Not in terms of like my mission statement is to have, full custody and, this much money, but more like my mission statement is to be a good parent, to get through this experience alive, to, not have this resentment. And that could be something for your listener, and your mission statement doesn't have to be, I want to agree to everything quickly. It might just be, I want to be true to myself and my needs. And I think that's one of the assumptions of NVC. And I do think I see this play out in my cases is that we don't need as much as we might think we need. We don't actually need as much money as we think or as much this or that. We need, like, for people, it's often like, I need to feel respected. I need to have, a close relationship with my kids and the ability to have that. And I need, a pathway to financial independence. And that can work for both people. Often there is enough resources and time to make those things happen. So the more that this person can get in touch internally with her needs, where does she want to be in 3 and 5 years? What does she need intact? And honestly, I do think that most times, the vast majority of the times, and I worked with about 500 families now, most people can achieve the things they really, really need to start again.
Yeah. Well, given that they're working with folks who have faith that that's possible, which I think is really crucial. Because again, the adversarial system would just presume that isn't possible.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. And the adversarial system, I mean, I think what they wind up doing is like, the saying of you can't get enough of something you don't really need, like the capitalist idea of like, we'll sell you a device for all of your things. It's like, well, that's not what people actually need. They need like closeness and community. And what courts are doing is they're trying to get people a lot of money and custody.
Right.
But what they actually need is like a strong relationship with their kids and financial security. And you can't get a close relationship with your kids usually from a judge. A judge can't say.
Yeah, that's not measurable in number of nights spent in your house.
That's right. We have this brilliant, so you'll love this from a therapy and from an educator standpoint. One of the most amazing things about collaborative law is that we bring in, instead of having the dueling experts, where one spouse hires an expert to say the other parent is terrible and so on forth, we do a neutral that everyone works with, and both parents will meet with this person, and then the kids will actually meet with this person. And we've got 2 here in Raleigh that we work with, and they are beyond brilliant. And they will come in and speak to both attorneys and both parents and say, I spoke with your kids. They're amazing. They're very brave. We talked in a very respectful way about where they're at. I've learned this about what they need. And I just had one last week. And in this case, dad had to travel a lot for work, and mom did a lot more of the day-to-day on the ground parenting. And Brian, this amazing child psychologist, said, 50-50 is a court standard. That's a nuts and bolts answer to a tough question. He said, what your kids both need. And he said, I'll tell you right now, your kids aren't counting days. They don't know. They don't care. All they need to know is when I'm, in trouble, when I, break my leg, are my parents going to show up? When I need dad because he provides me with X, can I find him? And when I need mom because she provides me with Y, can I find her? And both of the parents were like, oh. And it's like, yeah, our culture is so around 50-50. I see this on the dating apps now. Everyone's like, I have 50-50. It's like a mark of I'm a good parent. And I'm like, that's a very, very small part, a small measure of parenting.
Yeah, but it's something that they can actually point to and look at. And that's why people think that, well, that's the standard.
That's right. That's right. Agree. That's right. It's very easy to point to and fight for rather than, a secure attachment with your kids, which you both know
and
takes.
what's best for them. It might be 40-60, it might be 25-75.
Sure.
But, that doesn't sound so good to say, well, I only see my kid 25% of the time, but, maybe that's the time you're there.
That's
Like,
right.
he's traveling.
Maybe that's
50-50.
That's right. Maybe that's best for them. I have a case right now where there's a kid with extraordinary medical needs, and her mom is a nurse and her dad is an engineer. And so she needs to be with her mom a lot, and that's really good for her. And this dad is very aware and respecting of that. And he makes sure that his time with her is done doing their very favorite things. And that is absolutely a way to do what's best for your kids.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Nicole. This has been delightful and interesting and informative. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
Yes, this was wonderful.
Thank you both. I hope I didn't yammer too long.
No, I learned a lot. Boy, so many things that I didn't know and wasn't aware of. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you both so much for what you do. And as you know, I'm putting together my own podcast trying to share the stories of divorce. So maybe we can
tell folks your website, and I'll put it up on the screen and stuff.
Okay, yeah. Well, the firm website is twofamilieslaw.com, spelled out, and that's you can just learn a bit there about our process. And we can only work with folks who are in North Carolina, where at least one spouse is.
And I do say for our listeners, that's TWO.
Yes, thank you. That's right. The idea being that divorce creates two families with a lot of connection, and then our podcast, which is not out yet, it's in the works. It's a beautiful growing thing. It's called Divorced People. And actually, if you go to the Two Families Law website and you look under the resources tab, there's information about the divorced people. Right now, it's on a Patreon format where people can contribute, $5 a month towards the building of it. And I submit writings and little snippets on there as we get going. But that podcast is going to be the stories of folks who have been there, because I get to hear those stories every day. But most people don't know the nitty gritty of what it feels like in that messy and beautiful time. So
I look forward to checking out your podcast.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, I hope we connect more and more, and thank you both for having me and for what you do.
Thank you. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview, because it was very informative for me, and Nicole certainly had a lot of interesting things to say.
And we had, yes, indeed. I found that it was fun too. She's a nice person, interesting person.
Yeah,
it was really neat. So we've got a bunch of guests coming up as well.
We do. The next few weeks. We
never
don't
like
to say in advance, because you never know what can happen. So, but we do have guests lined up for the next month or so.
A few down the line, and we're still lining them up.
And we'd still love to have more. So if you'd like to be a guest on our program, or if you have questions to ask, much like Camilla had today, you can go to our website, ctn7.com, and you can find a place to send in your questions. You can find a place to sign up, or you can find a place to suggest guests for us.
And we hope you will do all of the above. Another word here for my newsletter. Please go to sign up for my newsletter. You can do that right from ctn7.com. There's a box that says something like subscribe to Dr. Chalmers' newsletter, and when you do that, and if, by the way, if I don't already have your email, don't forget to confirm it when you do that. You'll get a thing from the email people, the senders, saying, please confirm your email. That's an anti-spam thing, and I don't like spam. So please do that, and then you'll get my newsletter. The next edition is just about to come out. I think it may happen today, or at least perhaps on Sunday. So that'll be happening. And of course, the book, the new book, which is
It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong.
And that is out already in paperback. It's out as an audiobook where I did the narration, and it is coming out as the Kindle version the day after tomorrow as we're recording this, so on the 15th. If you're watching this anytime in the 15th on, you can go to Amazon.com and get the Kindle version there, and I hope you will do that. So I think we've covered what we need to cover.
I think we have.
And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.